Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining our webinar, Trends and Statistics on the Cloud. I'm Bella with InCloud, and today we'll provide insight on the overall industry view of the cloud. We'll also provide the audience with the latest facts and figures on cloud adoption and migration. Sharing his research findings today will be Michael Osterman. He is the Principal Analyst at Osterman Research, and he will then pass it on to Ali Din, the Chief Marketing Officer and General Manager at DinCloud, who will share some use cases and their perspectives. Please note you are muted, and we will have a Q&A session afterwards. If you have any questions, type them in the chat box. Without any further ado, we'll jump into our main content. So Michael, please take it away with the overview.
Well, Bella, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank everybody who's here with us today. I'd also like to thank Ali for joining us and thanking him in advance for his perspectives on DinCloud and the case studies he's going to present. Just a little about today's agenda. First, we're going to discuss where the cloud is going. We hear a lot about the cloud in the trade press, in the popular press, and we're going to discuss some research findings that we've generated recently from our own survey panel about where the cloud really is going in the context of email and various other types of information services. We'll then hear from Ali about findings from DinCloud with regard to case studies about virtual desktop deployment. He'll go into an overview of DinCloud's offerings, and then we will address as many of your questions as we can. So just a little bit about Osterman Research so you know our perspective in all of this. We are an independent market research and consulting firm, and our focus really is on messaging, web, and collaboration. It's really about how people communicate or collaborate in a workplace context. So we look really at all areas that impact communication and collaboration, like encryption, security, archiving, and so forth. We have a very strong emphasis on primary research. We'll be going through some of that here today. The company is almost 16 years old, and we're based near Seattle. So why is the cloud so popular, and why is it so popular right now? Well, if you look at the trade press at all, if you talk to IT managers, if you go to IT conferences and so forth, one of the things you really find is that IT resources are seriously constrained. IT is being asked to do a lot more than it ever has before because of requirements around security, e-discovery, regulatory obligations, and so forth. And so there's just a lot more on IT's plate that they have to get accomplished. The problem, though, is that the number of IT staff available is shrinking. And it's not that we don't have enough IT people, it's just that we don't have enough IT people with the right skills. The IT skill shortage is really very real, and the problem is getting worse. And so what we're faced with is a situation where organizations have a lot more IT tasks to accomplish and just not enough people to do them. Also, at the same time, we see a lot more cloud resources that are really widely available. They're relatively inexpensive. The number of vendors offering these in various flavors is increasing. And cloud really is offered in a variety of ways, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, and so forth. So at the same time that IT resources are being fairly seriously constrained, we also have a lot of cloud resources that are available to companies to sort of make up for the loss of IT resources. So it's really a good combination in many ways. And so the cloud is really becoming more popular because there's a real need for it. So what are the advantages of the cloud? Well, certainly one of the chief advantages is that there is no upfront costs. Unlike with an on-premises solution that requires the deployment of servers and appliances and software and lots of IT time and lots of other resources to deploy these capabilities, and as well as a lot of time to deploy them, there are no upfront costs with the cloud. They can be deployed very, very quickly, which is particularly advantageous if you're adding new employees or if you acquire a company or if you need to do something right away. You don't have the cost of doing that, and you also have the speed of doing that as well. You don't have any unexpected costs with the cloud. Typically, when you deploy a cloud solution, you're paying on a per-user basis, and so if there's some sort of unexpected problem, the cloud provider bears that cost, not their customers. Also, scarce IT staff members can be redeployed. If you are no longer managing your own email or your own desktops or security or whatever the case may be, you can take the scarce IT staff members that you have in place right now and use them for more value-added projects in your organization. You can put them to best advantage in a way that you really can't without the cloud. And so you get more value out of the scarce IT staff members that you have in place. Also, the cloud potentially is more secure than on-premises systems. Now, that's not going to be the case in every situation, but in many, it's really quite true that the cloud is going to be more secure than on-premises solutions because leading IT providers, leading cloud providers, really have the resources in place to be able to make their infrastructure and their facilities very secure in a way that a lot of organizations don't with their own on-premises systems. Also, you have tremendous elasticity and business flexibility with the cloud. If you need to add resources right away, you can do that. With on-premises solutions, you can also add those resources, but it does take some time. Also, with the cloud, there's very fast failover. So from a disaster recovery and business continuity perspective, you have tremendous advantages in that if something goes wrong with some part of the cloud infrastructure, leading providers can basically just switch their customers over to redundant systems and things keep running. Also, there's long-term scalability with the cloud in a way that you just don't have with most on-premises solutions. If you do need to add those resources quickly, you have that scalability over the long term, and so you don't need to worry about if you're, how you're building out your on-premises infrastructure simply because the cloud provider takes care of that for you. Potentially, there's easier compliance if you've chosen the right cloud providers because most of the leading providers are dealing very seriously with compliance. They're looking at compliance from a very long-term perspective and satisfying the various regulatory and other compliance obligations that are coming up. Now, it's important to say, too, that the cloud really is not a panacea. It's not going to solve every problem you might conceivably have, but it is going to solve a lot of them around cost and security and so forth. So getting into our research data here, business email is really, for want of a better term, a killer application for most individuals in the enterprise. Our research shows that among end users, the typical end user uses email about 150 minutes a day, about 2.5 hours a day doing something in their email client. Now, that's not just sending and receiving emails, but it's looking for files, it's looking for contacts, managing tasks, really doing a whole variety of things using email as the starting point. And as you can see here, the majority of the market today is served by on-premises Exchange, with about 3 out of 5 business users in North America being served by some version of on-premises Exchange. Microsoft is making a very concerted push into Office 365, and so over the next couple of years, we'll see a substantial move into Office 365 as a replacement for Exchange. Now, certainly other companies are doing this as well. Google Apps, IBM, lots of other cloud providers. And so Microsoft is not the only game in town, but certainly they're the leading provider, and we project will continue to be the leading provider of cloud-based email. Looking at archiving, we're also seeing a decided shift to the cloud. As you can see, the number of archiving seats continues to increase, and that mix is going from primarily on-premises last year to primarily cloud by 2018. And the reasons for that are that, certainly organizations are realizing all the benefits of the cloud that we discussed earlier in terms of no upfront costs, easier compliance, and so forth, but also as organizations add new content types, adding social media to the archiving mix, adding text messaging and voicemail and so forth, it's simply going to be easier to do that in the cloud. And a lot of decision makers are realizing that that's the case, and they're opting to go with cloud-based archiving as opposed to on-premises archiving. Security is also moving decidedly to the cloud. What we found in our research is that the proportion of various security capabilities is moving very decidedly to the cloud. Now, certainly there is going to be a need for desktop infrastructure for antivirus and anti-malware. There's still going to be server-based anti-spam tools and so forth, but we see a decided shift to the cloud. As you can see here, going from the fourth quarter of last year to what we project will be the second quarter of next year, there's going to be a very significant shift in terms of capabilities around antivirus and anti-spam, DLP, email encryption, and so forth that are moving to the cloud. Again, there's still going to be a significant need for on-premises, but cloud is going to be picking up in a very significant way. Now, in terms of preferences for the cloud, we did a survey recently on hybrid cloud. And one of the things we wanted to find out is if organizations were going to deploy some sort of an application, how do they want to deploy it, both initially and in terms of its final deployment? And taking just one of the the data points from the survey, we asked decision makers in mid-sized and large organizations if they were going to be deploying some sort of a customer-facing application, how would they want to do it? Well, certainly initially, when you're doing the alpha and beta rollout, when you're doing testing and so forth, a lot of organizations want to do that on premises. They want to have things under their control because they don't need the scalability, they don't need the external facing capabilities and so forth. So a lot of it is on premises. But when they move to the cloud, they do want to use, for the most part, some version of cloud, whether it's public or private or some sort of a hybrid cloud. So certainly organizations want to do their development in-house, but when they get to that final deployment of major cloud-facing or customer-facing applications, they definitely want to do that primarily in the cloud. Also, in terms of virtual desktops, another major cloud environment, the VDI market is going to top $500 million in 2016. So this is a large and rapidly growing market. And virtual desktops really offer a number of significant operational advantages. Much faster deployment for new users. There's much greater agility because of the greater flexibility in desktop capabilities, allowing people to access their desktop from any location using just about any computer, and certainly lower cost than the traditional model of providing a desktop to end users. And we feel that the shift to VDI is not going to be driven just by cost, but also driven largely by security. There's no local storage with VDI. There's no local ability to install software, which means you can't install ransomware or malware nearly as easily in a VDI environment. And that's going to lead to significantly reduced opportunities for data breaches. And if you read the popular press, if you look at sites like privacyrights.org, you'll find that data breaches are an absolutely enormous problem. With regard to privacyrights.org, they've been tracking data breaches since in January of 2005. And what they've recorded now is roughly 900 million records that have been breached. And that's very often because things like laptop computers have been stolen, desktop computers have been stolen, local storage has been compromised, and so forth. And with VDI, you do away with most of those problems. And so from a security perspective, virtual desktops offer enormous advantages, and decision makers are going to realize that, as many of them already have. And really that shifts control back to IT. Instead of having lots of data and lots of valuable digital assets out at the endpoints, those can be much more controlled by IT in a much more controlled environment. So in terms of the future of the cloud, certainly if you look back to the mid-50s, you see that we were in an environment where mainframes were accessed essentially by dumb terminals, by dumb endpoints. Client-server took over in the 1980s, and what we see now is that we have enormous computing resources in the cloud that are accessed by smart endpoints, desktop computers, laptops, mobile devices, and so forth. What we will find, though, is that in the future, using virtual desktops, cloud resources, cloud computing, cloud data is going to be accessed by what we're calling ignorant endpoints. There's going to be a monitor and keyboard for people to use, whether that's a laptop or a desktop computer, but there's not going to be any local storage. All of that storage is going to be in the cloud, and that's going to make our environment much more secure than it is today. Also looking further afield, and we won't get into this today, but will your smartphone become your laptop and desktop, where the CPU in your iPhone or your Android device essentially becomes the CPU that you use to access your basically a desktop or a laptop experience. That's part of the future of computing that virtual desktops can help to provide as well. So a little bit more into virtual desktops here. With adequate bandwidth, the computing experience is going to be identical to that of laptops and desktops. If you don't have adequate bandwidth, obviously there are going to be performance limitations, but most enterprises today and most consumers today have adequate bandwidth to support a very robust virtual desktop experience. Again, virtual desktops are dramatically safer. Data breaches certainly won't be a thing of the past with virtual desktops, but they will become much less frequent simply because there's no local data. Again, going back to privacyrights.org, if you look at the data breaches that have occurred, very often those are because of somebody stealing a laptop. Well, in a virtual desktop environment, there's no data to steal if that laptop goes missing, and so data breaches simply don't exist in that scenario. Because data is maintained in a public or private cloud data center with stronger controls, things are just that much safer. The user experience is safer. Ransomware is going to be less able to infect endpoints. Malware is less able to infect endpoints and so forth. And so, again, stolen laptops, stolen mobile devices, ransomware, malware, and so forth simply won't result in the data breaches that we see today. And also in terms of greater business agility, users can work from anywhere, which is going to be highly supportive of telework environments. And also real estate costs go down dramatically because one of the fundamental advantages of the cloud, as with virtual desktops, is that you don't need to provide a space for somebody in an office. They can work from home, they can otherwise work remotely. And so real estate costs can go down dramatically when you have a virtual desktop environment. So in summary, what we're seeing in our data is that the use of the cloud is really growing by leaps and bounds across a wide range of applications. Just about everything you can name is moving to the cloud in some respect. The cloud is, at least it can be, cheaper, much faster to deploy for most organizations, significantly more scalable than traditional on-premises systems, and it's a way to use your skilled IT staff much more effectively than maybe you are today, also enabling greater business agility at the same time. What we see is that a growing number of organizations, really across the board, small, mid-sized, and large, are going to be adopting some sort of a cloud computing model, whether it's public or private or maybe hybrid cloud, where they still maintain some solutions on premises. And finally, the cloud is not a solution to every problem, but it is for many of them. Here's our contact information. We'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. And at this point, I would like to turn things over to Ali. Ali, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. And again, thank you for sharing your research findings. I realize our audience does include both end users as well as consultants. And so, so far, I believe this has been valuable to both parties, and I'll continue to keep that in mind as we're going through some of the perspectives I was going to share. But before I went into that, I thought we'd just touch on a couple of case studies or use cases, and just to give a little flavor, and then we can go into the Q&A and address very specific questions based on your industries and verticals. So I think one of the things that Mike had pointed out was the security capabilities, or the benefits really, around desktop virtualization and a service-based virtualization of the desktop. And ransomware, it seems like it's one of these topics. We actually have one customer in particular that has been reverting back to their backups on a pretty frequent basis because they have end users that are usually home-based, and they tend to keep, I guess, getting onto sites that are then phishing or somehow affecting or infecting their desktops. And so we're rolling back their desktop to the day before. And so that's one kind of convenient thing, that there's very little downtime, very little reinstallation of anything with a virtual desktop. You just wipe it and you can start over, or you can quarantine one and get and move on to the next one, and the user's hardly impacted. As many of you probably, unfortunately, have experienced with blue screens or other challenges with your own laptops or computers, it's not a very pleasant experience to have to refresh and reinstall all your applications on Windows. So that was just to touch on something that we were covering earlier. A couple other examples we've seen in manufacturing. This would be Motorola's acquisition of Zebra, and they were trying to bring on thousands of users, and they had a very tight time frame to do this. Their other challenge was that because of the nature of the acquisition, they did not own the endpoint devices, and therefore they could not install their own operating system and their own software on those desktops or laptops or whatever those devices were. So they utilized DinCloud's virtualized desktop because that was something that they did own and control, and they could deploy the applications that way, and all the users were able to get in and still be able to function. So that's coming from manufacturing, but probably from a scenario perspective, that's mergers, acquisitions, spin-offs, divestitures, all those kind of fall into this kind of a situation. The other common example we see, and this is with, in particular, a financial services or a lending organization that we work with, is a remote workforce. And these are people that generally don't have access to a local IT resource, but in this customer's situation, what happened is, or the case they run into, is they have a lot of churn in their new hires, and then they have some people leaving, and they have a very high cost of deploying assets out. So they'll first purchase a laptop, they'll asset tag it, they'll image it, and then they'll ship it out to the end user, and the user will start to use it, and then they, if the user leaves, then they have to pull all those assets back and then redeploy them. So again, by using a virtualized desktop, they've been able to cut down those costs significantly. They don't have to buy the latest and greatest endpoint devices because all the processing is done. But most importantly for this organization, because it is in financial services, is that the data is secure. There's a difference between what's sitting on the end user's device and that data versus what's inside of the virtual desktop and what's secured that way. And there's a lot of controls that companies can put in there. So hopefully that gives you a quick flavor, and again, we can go into very specific examples during Q&A so that we can tailor it a little bit more to you. But let's go ahead and jump into the perspectives here. And probably many of you have already kind of know this, but just sharing our perspective on things is running an IT organization is really like steering a ship in the ocean. You're going to encounter a lot of rough water. You have inclement weather to deal with. You're constantly having to adjust course, whether it's internal factors or external factors. There's just a lot of dynamic things going on. And so if we take a look at, if we move on to the next slide, what we've seen out there in terms of finding solutions to these challenges, in Greek mythology, there were these sirens, and they would lure sailors just by their voices. And in the same way, you have these large public cloud providers, and they've lured a lot of customers into their public cloud, and now everyone's on their island. And what happens is these islands are so huge that there's a lot of complexity in there, and so people can get easily lost. And it's very difficult to leave these islands because once you're anchored in there, it's hard to pull things out, whether it's the format of the files that they use or whatever it may be. So if we go to the next slide, the approach, the philosophy at DynCloud is really different, the way we look at it. When you look at our logo, our cloud was really developed, you can see the little lock in there, and it's to represent our primary focus on security. And it's not just about physical security or cybersecurity measures. Sometimes the lack of control can give people insecurity as well. So these are all the factors that we wanted to take into account when we provided our hosted private cloud to a customer. Another thing that we were looking at was transparency. So you have that full control to run the cloud, and then we also wanted pricing transparency. We wanted it to be very predictable. It's not changing like the tides of the ocean on a month-to-month basis. It's very predictable and flat rate based. But I think enough of these pictures. Let's go on to the next slide. Just a little bit more of a diagram type image here. And this is basically what we offer. We started off as a hosted virtual desktop provider back in 2011. And since then, we did a ton of research on what the right software was, what the right type of endpoints would work, what's the optimal combination of compute, storage, networking equipment that would give the right performance and resiliency in a very specific workload, which was for the desktop, because this is very different from someone that's used to running an infrastructure as a service or hosting servers, because desktops are used by an end user. There's a lot more constant back and forth going on, and so performance was very essential. So when we started the company, we started off with desktops, and then we added in the virtual servers because of just the pure physics of having your servers, your applications, your desktops all running in the same private cloud. And then, of course, that generated storage requirements. People wanted to connect to other off-premise or on-premise systems. So we've built a lot of open architecture in here, and then we've wrapped it all around with something we call DIN Manage, which is a piece of software we wrote that helps people automate a lot of these functions and to manage and orchestrate the cloud within their private and isolated environment. Let's move on to the next slide. And this gives you a sense of the partners that we've worked with. We really wanted to go, again, through transparency, wanted to work with top-tier partners, whether it's Microsoft or it's HP. For the data centers, we partner with a company called Equinix, which is a public company. They have over 100 data centers around the world. We're able to spin up in any of those data centers within 8 weeks. So if you just think about how long it takes you to design, order, and implement just your normal on-premise equipment, we can actually be up and running in any location essentially in the world in less time. What this really shows you also is the support, the flexibility that we bring into the equation. Our philosophy here is about simplicity and giving customers flexibility. So everything is tailored to the workload, whether it's the high performance of a desktop or the high performance of a database like SQL, or if someone just needs standard infrastructure as a service, we have different platforms that will support those types of workloads. The other thing that, again, just continuing the theme of transparency is, many times if you go to these big public cloud providers, you don't have a lot of control over anything. And not only that, you don't actually have the ability to see what type of equipment or where your data is being stored. And we actually invite customers, and they're more than welcome to visit us, do data center tours, take a look at where their data is, take a look at the facilities. That's something, again, we want to offer that we feel is essential when someone is trusting us with running their private cloud. And that was pretty much it. I just wanted to do a quick overview. I thought it'd be better for us to save most of our time for questions. So again, my name is Ali Din with DinCloud. Very happy to have Mike and Osterman share their findings, and I'll turn it back over to Bella and see if we have some questions.
All right, thank you, Ali. So now we'll proceed with our Q&A portion of the session. So please note that you are still muted, and if you have any questions, you can proceed to type them in the chat box below. Now, so I do see our first question is, how do you get your data back if a cloud provider suddenly decides to raise rates very, very high?
Great, Bella. So I'll take that. This is Ali. In terms of getting data back, so again, this goes back to the formats that are used with cloud providers, and we wanted to stay within kind of an open architecture. We wanted it to be very easy for customers not just to put their data in, but if they wanted, they should be able to take their data out. The two options really boil down to physically shipping data out. So some customers will ship over a drive and will transfer the data onto a physical drive and ship it back to them. Because of the size of the data, usually this seems to be a fairly efficient mechanism to do things. And then, of course, they can also just transfer their data over the internet. One of the great things we feel, or value propositions, is we don't charge for data transfer fees. So that means whether it's just the day-to-day data going back and forth and the pings and acknowledgments between your premise and our data centers, you don't get charged for that. And then if you're pulling your data out, again, we don't charge for bandwidth usage. It's all built into the flat rate pricing that we have.
Okay, thanks, Ali. So the second question we have is, does the cloud back up your data? Where is it stored, and how often is the backup done?
This question, there were a couple points in here. It was around backing up data and frequency. So we have two platforms that we run. One is for our hosted workspaces, which is the desktops applications. We call that our WebScale infrastructure. And then we have another one, which is primarily for infrastructure as a service. We call that Converged. The Converged infrastructure is supported with a SAN, which is run on NetApp. And that NetApp software allows us to provide daily snapshots. We hold those for 10 days and then regroup and start over. So that's one option. We also allow customers to add on backup capabilities. So we have a service called DIN Backup, and that allows, it's a CDP-based backup, so you can back up not just your standardized data, but you can also do databases like SQL, you can do SharePoint and Exchange as well. And this can come down to a 15-minute increment. This is actually a much more controlled level of backup where the customer or their managed service partner can actually control the frequency and the type of backups and have much more control over it. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, thank you, Ali. So is VDI still a cost-effective alternative compared to cloud solutions like Office 365 and BYOD?
Comparing a hosted VDI with Office 365, so there's some differences. Office 365 is very specific to running an application, and then so you're running one application and then you're using another service to store your data, the documents that are being generated by that service. And VDI or desktop as a service, what that would do is give you the entire workspace all in one capsule. So if you look at something like an iCloud or a combination of iCloud and Netflix, it really gives you everything in one place. So this is your desktop with your wallpaper, your applications, your documents. Anything that you would normally have on a desktop is all streamed through the data center to the device. And so from a productivity perspective, you have everything in place. If you're trying to do this yourself or you're trying to do it one by one through an application, you're going to have to manage that and figure out how those applications are going to transfer data and documents between one another. And if you're doing it from an on-premise perspective, then you have to factor in all the individual components of building the VDI, whether that's storage or computing and networking equipment, and then all the software to do the virtualization, to do the security, and all the monitoring on top of that as well.
Okay, thank you. So our next question is, Internet is critical with cloud communication, so do we need local backup?
Okay, I'll take that one as well. In terms of local backup and requirements from that perspective, so it does probably depend on regulations for the industry and for the company and the nature of having access to data locally. Again, through DIN Backup and the different services we offer, whether it's high availability or it's redundancy of the data, you can get that in the cloud as well. But if you choose to have it on-premise as a local copy, you can also choose to do that. And of course, you can use additional software, whether it's Veeam or some other software to do local backups. From a internet or that perspective, whether you have internet, of course, you will need that piece of it. In terms of having your local LAN or WAN as well, you still run into that issue of if you have a power outage or internet network connectivity issues. That's just the nature and the physics behind computing. So it just depends again on regulation and requirements. If you need to keep local copies, but you can have all that redundancy built into the cloud. It just depends on the situation and how where you'd like to keep the data.
Yeah, and I would just add as well that there are some organizations that really do like to have that local backup. Either just because there's a comfort level or as Ali noted, maybe there's a regulatory requirement to maintain data in a particular jurisdiction, or certainly behind the corporate firewall. So you do have the flexibility of doing that with the virtual infrastructure, and it's going to be on a really case by case basis.
Okay, thank you for the answer. So I think these are more administrative questions, but are we able to get a copy of the slides after the session?
Yes, absolutely. We'll let everybody, we'll send everybody an email giving them both a replay of this webinar as well as a copy of the slide deck.
Okay, and then I think I have one last question here. So can you give us, or who should we call to get support, or to have a live person as a support correspondent?
Sure. So this is Ali again. So we do have our main line on the screen, the 424-286-2300, and there is a cloud consultant you can press right from there. And then when we send the follow-up emails, we can also include some contact information, or right from the website, there's a way to just submit a form and say, I'd like someone to call me back, and they can do a call instead of an email, if that's the preference.
Okay, thanks, Ali. So it seems like we have no more questions in the chat box. So, all right, thank you, Michael and Ali, and great information covered today. So we do have a number of related resources available in this space. So you can contact Osterman or DinCloud by phone or email if you have any questions following the webinar, or you can visit our websites for more information. With that said, I'd like to thank everyone for joining our webinar and hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, everyone.
Great, thank you very much.